it's so hard when you get to a position like a director to articulate your vision to a specialist in a particular skill set, like sound or lighting or production design, when you don't speak the language.
Hey everyone, and welcome to One Story Building, where I have a new backdrop and everything's looking a lot more professional. Today's guest is theatre director, producer, and managing director of the theatre review site, theatretravels.com, Carly Fisher. Hi, Carly. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
So before we get into why Theatre Travels was made, let's talk about you.
Okay.
Why did you get into theatre in general?
So I have always wanted to act. That's what I thought I wanted to do my whole life. I can't tell you I've ever wanted to be anything other than an actor. And from a very early age, realized for me that it was all about the stage more so than screen, which I think is quite different for young kids. Usually they're so attracted to the movies and the TV shows. And I just always love theatre.
I studied film and then got into and then fell in love with the stage.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really usual progression. I was just really lucky that from a few months old, my mum started taking me to the theatre. I saw my first musical by the time I was 2. So it's been very much instilled in me, this passion for the arts and this respect for the arts. Mm-hmm. But as I said, I always wanted to be an actor, and I went to uni to do my sensible backup degree to become a teacher. And while I was there, I joined the Theatre Society, of course, and as luck would have it, got asked to direct a review. And I thought, okay, I've never tried directing, but I'm interested. I'll give it a try, and fell in love with it. And it was absolutely just a total coincidence, but it was never looking back. And loved directing, fell into producing in the same way while at uni. And then at the end of my degree went, this is what I want to do. I don't need to go back on stage. I found my spot, and this is where I'm supposed to be. And I just found that there was a real lack of opportunity for emerging artists, specifically for new grads, and especially if you didn't do a theatre degree. And I went, oh my gosh, now what? How do I continue to make this my life? And that's why I formed a company, but we'll get to that when we get to it.
Was that plan after you graduated there from the start, or when you were learning theatre stuff, did it arise through that training?
Definitely. Because my degree, I was studying to become a high school teacher, and I thought that would be the path I would take, and that would be my sensible backup if the whole acting thing didn't work out. But I, as a very, in my sensible shoes on, and also as a bit of a promise to family, I'm sure many people have made, thought I'll give this a try first, and then I can go and pursue acting if that's what I still want to do. But I'll go and grow up a bit at uni. And I'm so glad I did, because I don't think I ever would have naturally found myself on the creative side of it as opposed to the acting side of it. And I just love directing. I love the challenge. I love the vision. I love all of it. It just so speaks to who I am. And producing speaks very much to my skill set. My type A personality is very at home in the producer role.
Well, here is the question that no one in the world knows the answer to. What does a producer actually do?
Great question. And I agree with you that no one knows the answer. And I'd say that includes me. I think it's very much up to each individual producer as to what they do. I work in the independent arts sector. So for me, it's everything from being the literary agent that big companies would have, which means I read all the scripts, I decide what we're going for, I chase the rights, I secure the rights, I pay for the rights. I also run the budget. I make sure all of our investment is in place. I do all the contracting. I do all the casting, all the crew hiring. I make the show, really.
All the boring
I get it from
backstage
being an idea
stuff
that someone wants to do to being something that has a ticket buying audience. And that's how I see my job. My master's degree is in PR and advertising. So up until now, and continuing it for at least now, I have also done all of our publicity and marketing. I've done all of that in-house as well. So yeah, I'd say everything from reading a script all the way through to how do I sell the ticket. That's what my job is.
All right. So what do you think is the most effective way to market your show and get it out there to the largest crowds possible and the right crowds?
It's a really good question, particularly during COVID, because if anyone can answer it, I'd love to know the answer. It's so hard right now to sell tickets in this, particularly with this Omicron wave. But generally, I would start with what the show is itself. For example, I've got a couple shows up in February right now, and one of them is about the Vietnam War. It's a cast of 5 women who range in age from 40 to 75. And just by virtue of the theme and of the cast, I have a more Facebook heavy, email heavy approach versus another cast that I have who are performing a show called 5 Lesbians Eating a Quiche as part of the Mardi Gras Festival and then the Adelaide Fringe Festival. And they're a younger cast. And again, so we switch back to Instagram and we have a more heavy reliance on Instagram. But I'd say in general, social media is a huge tool in a producer's armor. In the independent sector's armor, we don't have the budget that, you know, a show that goes on at the major theatres around the country have. We don't have it. I think in Perth it's Her Majesty's. Here for us it would be His Majesty's.
I forget. It seems to jump back and forth depending on who you're asking.
One of the major cities
Someone's
is His
Majesty's.
Majesty. One is Her Majesty. So I think Melbourne might be her. But here in Sydney, it would be the Lyric or the Capitol. You know, but I'm talking the huge stages that obviously are playing with a different budget that we just can't in the independent sector. And so we rely really heavily on word of mouth. We try to make sure that all of our shows maintain a really high quality and are really entertaining. And we hope that that keeps bringing our audiences back. And so far, Theatre Travels has done 17 shows and we have had success in that. Last year in 2021, we sold 100% of our 5 shows out before they opened. So that was a huge achievement right in the middle of COVID. We were between COVID 1 and Delta. So we were really stoked about that. But it's hard. It's definitely the hardest part of the job.
Word of mouth truly is the greatest way to advertise a show, but I can't think of a way to instigate that in the audience without it coming off as kind of like when I'm in the audience and I've watched a show and then someone comes out afterwards and says, hey, if you like this show, go and tell your friends. I'm like, I don't think I'll tell my friends now that you've told me to do it. What's the best way to instigate word of mouth without it being obnoxious?
Make the show good enough that they want to talk about it.
That's difficult.
Yeah, it is
hard
difficult.
To make good stuff.
We also try, I would say personally that I've never done an announcement like that. If I wanted to try and maintain audience engagement afterwards, I'd probably push it from the social media side of it, maybe with like a big QR code, like join us on Instagram or follow us on Instagram, join with us on Facebook, something like that. I'd take a social media side and hope that by them continuing to see us and see new content and whatnot, they are reminded about their positive experience at the show and therefore they talk about it. It's a bit more of a roundabout way, but I agree with you. If someone said to me, hey, go tell all your friends, I'd be like, okay, peace out. You go tell all my friends, that's literally your job. So, yeah. So
when did Theatre Travels, this theatre review site, how did that come into play after uni?
Yeah, so Theatre Travels started as an Instagram account that I started because I was traveling a lot. I love to travel and I go anywhere and everywhere as often as I can. And I have always seen a lot of theatre and people were constantly asking me what I thought. And so I thought, okay, I'll make a separate account so that if you're not a theatre person, you can just live my life with me on Instagram. And if you are, you can join Theatre Travels. And so in January 2016, I started this Instagram account while I was in New York in a hotel room one night. And it really took off. People really liked having short form reviews because I was doing, a couple hundred words on Instagram as their way to determine whether they wanted to see a show or not. They didn't have to pick up a newspaper and read, an academic or theatre jargon written article. They just had to read a quick Instagram post that was intentionally written in very colloquial theatre lover language as opposed to theatre maker language. And I think that that's something that's really important. We've always maintained with theatre travels. We like to talk to the audience and say, this is why or why not you may like or not like the show, not here's a technical spin on everything we just saw on stage. And I'll get to this part. I'll go back to it. So we were an Instagram account.
Mm-hmm.
I was then, as I said, at the end of my uni degree, deciding where to go next or what to do next. And I started talking to some friends about starting a theatre company, and it was this crazy ambition. And there were 9 of us, or 7 or 9 of us, that started this idea together. And one by one, everyone got scared and they all left. And I was determined. It was 2017 at this time. 2018 was approaching, and I knew that 2018 was the 20th anniversary of Matthew Shepard's passing. And Matthew Shepard is a man who was killed in a hate crime in Laramie, Wyoming, now 24 years ago. And there's a very famous play written about him called The Laramie Project.
Mm-hmm. I studied the Laramie in high school, and I had to do a bunch of American accents, and I was terrible.
Well, I did it in high school as part of a study of verbatim theatre, which is when I was introduced to that theatrical form and fell in love, and it's now my thing.
Verbatim theatre. Even though I was
Sorry?
what's verbatim theatre for those who don't know? Unlike me,
of course. So verbatim theatre in America is usually called documentary theatre, and I think that's a much easier way to understand it. It's essentially it's the same as a documentary you'd watch on TV, but we do it on stage. So all of the words are taken from interviews, from recordings, newspaper clippings, news articles, etc. They're all real people and they're real words. And so it is literally like the transcription of an interview, but then a dramaturg obviously goes ahead and molds it into something an audience wants to see. So of course it's edited like any article would be, but that's verbatim theatre. And it's the real words from the real people about a real event. And Laramie introduced me to this form of theatre. I fell in love with it, and I continued every year after high school. I'd read the Laramie Project once a year to remind myself of why you just need to be a really good person and not be crap like those guys. And I was reading it again just after the Marriage Equality Act, because I thought, gosh, if ever you needed a good time to read a show about why it's important just to love one another, this is the time. After all of the toxicity in the air, I just wanted to focus on something. So I reread the Laramie Project, and I opened up the first page and noticed the date and 1998 and went, oh my gosh, this is what I'm going to do. This is going to be my first show. I'm going to do the 20th anniversary of his passing. I'm putting the show on for that event, and I'm going to do it. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it. And as I said, no one else was quite so I'll use the word ambitious to be polite to myself, but the truth is nuts. No one else was so crazy. And so I went for it, and I turned Theatre Travels from an Instagram account into a company. I registered in 2017, and we debuted our first production in 2018. And I was just really lucky to have an amazing support team who encouraged it, particularly my family, and also some amazing friends, one of whom started working with me on that show and then worked with the company ever since. And yeah, it's been a wild ride that I think I can confidently say I've never expected the next thing to happen as it happened. But I think that when one door opens, you just have to walk through it and see what happens. And so that's what I did. I wanted to do the show. I made a production company. We got to the end of a huge production, and I went, oh my gosh, now what? Because we actually did the Laramie Project and the Laramie Project 10 years later in repertoire. So we had 9 actors do over 112 characters, 5.5 hours of content in a 150-seat theatre here. And that was my first show. And I now look at it and go, what was I thinking? So after that, I was like, what do I do next? And so I started a festival because I thought, maybe that's what we do next. And that was fantastic. That's the No Intermission Festival, which is a festival of one-act plays. that is specifically designed to create opportunities for emerging artists. And that ranges from the playwright right through to all the actors, all the creatives, all the crew. Everyone is considered an emerging artist. And so I thought that's why I started the company in the first place. I didn't know where to go from point A to point B. What are the stepping stones to get you there? Why doesn't Theatre Travels make the stepping stones? And then I thought, oh, the Instagram's still going pretty well. Maybe I should see if anyone wants to read the reviews if I put them online and make them a bit longer. And Theatre Travels Reviews was born. And so Theatre Travels is both a production company that operates predominantly out of Sydney and then tours shows around the country, and a reviewing platform that is nationwide. And we have over 50 reviewers who write for us. Everyone's a volunteer. Most work in some capacity in the industry. It's actually 76% of us work in the industry. And so I consider it like a peer review site. And as I said before, it's always been our mission just to make the reviews really accessible and to make theatre really accessible and to stop with the jargon and stop with the highfalutin theatre chat and instead say, hey guys, this is why you may want to see the show. And you should see the show because everyone should go out to the theatre. And that was always the goal, get more people to see more theatre. That was Theatre Travel's only mission statement. And it remains true.
Can you give us some theatre jargon that you would totally take out of a review?
I'd never take something out if I think a reviewer has put it in there for a reason. I'm very light-handed in my editing. My writers are just as good as you see on my website. They are just that great. So I'm very light-handed because I believe whatever anyone wants to say, they should get to say. I think that it's particular things like I would never go so far as to name what kind of light is hanging and why that light produces a particular effect. Firstly, because I actually have no idea. And secondly, because no one wants to read it, except people who are really into lighting. I'd be equally hesitant. This is a really small one, actually. This is a really small one. I never, in my reviews that I write, I never refer to stage left or right because it's the opposite to the audience's stage left or right. But if you're not in the theatre, you wouldn't know. And so that's not fair. Like everyone, so it's tiny little things where it's just like, just speak like you're talking to a friend. And that's what I've always wanted Theatre Travels to be. It's just our readers are friends, and because anyone who goes to the theatre should be a friend. Also some fun like little theatre terms that I'm now thinking I might start lacing through my reviews. My current favorite is park and bark. Have you heard of that term before?
Park as in park a car and bark as in a dog's bark.
Yeah.
Never heard of it.
So it's my new favorite because it's literally when you have an actor who like stops in one spot on stage, and it was created for musical theatre, but I use it in plays as well. It's when they're not in musical theatre, it's when they're not a dancer. And so the dancers are all happening around them, and you put one actor on the side of the stage to do the massive belt and to like really sing from the top of their lungs. And I heard Lin-Manuel Miranda speaking about it in an interview recently. And I mentioned that because the interview was about Hamilton, which, you know, you can watch on Apple TV, if not at the theatre. And he said, he's like, I don't dance. Like if you actually watch what I do, I'm constantly standing still and just singing while everything else moves around me. I'm parking and barking. And I was like, oh, great use of the term. Like, yes, you are. You're not moving. So I say the same thing to my actors now when I want them to be doing something natural. And, you know, when we walk and talk, we can do both at the same time. So in a scene, you should do both at the same time too. You don't have to walk, find your spot, deliver your line, walk, find your spot, deliver your line. So I keep saying to my actors, I'm like, you're parking and barking, keep it moving.
It's always so funny when someone putting on a show asks the cast, and I've been asked this, do you do dance or do you do movement? Not do you do dance or can't you dance? Do you do dance or do you do movement? But I've said I
do like that. I've never asked that.
I've thought for a while that very often the ensemble are working harder than the main cast because they're not only singing, but they're dancing around the main guy standing still and just singing and sounding impressive, even though the ensemble are singing as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And actually, it's something I've been noticing a lot because I'm very fortunate, and as I do travel and I get to see a lot, I've really been paying a lot more attention to the ensembles. And I have to say, and this is with no bias, I don't think that there are ensembles on any other major stage in the world like the Australian ensembles. Our ensemble talent is extraordinary
They're just happy to be
because,
there.
yeah, well, it's that, but also it's because we train differently. So I can't really speak to the English system because I don't know as much about England. But in the US, when you're training in the arts, you generally specialize in something, and you specialize from quite early on. So you are a ballet dancer, or you are a singer, or you are a blah, blah, blah. And here we have a far greater emphasis on being a triple threat. And so if you are wanting to be a dancer, that's great, but you need to learn to sing and act. And if you want to be an actor, you're going to be a lot more successful if you know how to sing or dance. And so there is this like emphasis on really having an all-rounder approach to your training. And maybe that means, well, I wouldn't even say that. Sometimes you could argue that that would make them better at one particular thing. But honestly, I don't think that that's true anymore. I think that our Australian ensembles are remarkable and undervalued too often. And it's something that I've really been trying to change in my reviewing as well, is acknowledging the very hardworking ensemble and how amazing they are, because like you just said, they probably have the hardest job on stage. And they have to do it in unison usually as well. So everything is just tougher on the ensemble often, depending on the show, of course. But I've just really been noticing lately. And I actually just came back from New York. I went over the Christmas, New Year break and, saw a whole bunch of shows again. And they're extraordinary. No one can in any way deny that Broadway performers are next level. But I was watching the ensembles going, our guys are just as good, often better, and made me very proud to be part of the Australian theatre industry. And I love what I do. I'm glad to be part of it.
Do you think that Australian performers are encouraged to become triple threats just because there's less artistic stuff going on in Australia? So they have to have their hands in so many pots so they can fall back on something?
I think that that's definitely, it is important. We all do need to have more than one skill, unfortunately, in this industry. And maybe that is because there is a little bit less available. That's a good point. I think also we have a much smaller population in our arts industry. And, if in New York, if you want like a 7-foot redhead with green freckles and blue ears, you're going to find someone, right? And you're not going to find that necessarily here. So if you want to make sure that you are available for every job that comes our way, you need to know how to do it all. I actually think, though, to answer the question that you just asked, to add to the question, I suppose, is it a good idea for us just to train to be triple threats? And I actually don't think it's enough anymore. I think that if you don't also have a backstage skill, you can't really go into the industry anymore. And I think that if slowly performing arts schools, like dance schools, etc., after school activities, if they slowly start to introduce the backstage skills into our repertoire, we'd totally change the industry. So, and that comes in two forms. Firstly, we'd actually have, three. Firstly, we'd have enough people to actually do the jobs, because I don't know about in Perth, but far out, it's hard to find a really good lighting designer in Sydney who will do independent work. They're like unicorns and they're treated like unicorns too. My lighting designers, I'm so happy to have you here. So one, we need more people in those roles in the industry. Two is that there has been this long-standing division between cast and crew. And that starts at a school level and often goes right up to the upper echelons of the industry. And I think that if we all learned how hard it is to do each other's job, we would ditch that division and start to act as a team, which is very much how I like to operate my productions. We're one team, whatever your role is. Nothing in the show works if not every person is on board and not every person is in the building. Very simple. It's one thing, It's one thing if you can't turn up and you're on stage and we have to put in an understudy. It's another thing if the lighting operator doesn't turn up and you have to do it in the dark. Do you know what I mean? Everyone's job is so important. So I think it would be great to see further education making us quadruple threats, I suppose, having a backstage skill to break that division. I think it would make for a more harmonious industry. And finally, I think that if you do ever want to go into the creative side of it, if you do want to go into direction, I wish I'd learnt about lighting, well, at all, but certainly earlier, because it's so hard when you get to a position like a director to articulate your vision to a specialist in a particular skill set, like sound or lighting or production design, when you don't speak the language. And I think that it's a great opportunity to move into a role like a director. It doesn't happen for a lot of people, but for those who chase this dream and want this, learn those languages, learn the language of sound and the language of costume and the language of lighting, because you're going to have a much easier ride if you do.
If I have any piece of advice for anyone who wants to be an actor, pretty much anywhere, is learn how to write, because you're probably going to have to write your own shows and put on your own shows on your own.
Absolutely. Or if you're in the film industry, I'd say learn those camera angles. You need to know what works and what looks good.
So you are and correct me if I'm wrong, the managing director for Theatre Travels. Is that your title?
Yeah.
Okay. What does a managing director
do? My title's
do?
flexible. I'm sometimes the artistic director. I'm sometimes the managing director. It depends if I have my director or my producer hat on.
All right. Well, how do you managering and how do you directoring the site?
Sorry. So how do I?
I made the words weird for comedic
No,
effect,
it's
but it
okay.
didn't really work out.
What does that job entail?
As the managing director, what do you do on theatretravels.com?
I run the company.
Mm-hmm.
I run the company.
Okay.
This is not a standard role of a managing director. This is the managing director of an independent small company. So I literally do everything. I have my hand in every pot, do everything from every single review that comes to our site. I'm the editor, I'm the publisher. And we have reviewed over 1,200 shows in less than 3 years, with a pandemic in the middle there that closed the industry down for 10 months. So we do.
I just did the math, and that is impressive.
Yeah, it's a lot of shows. So, and I have personally published every single one of those reviews. So I do all of that for our review site. I'm also a reviewer myself, but predominantly I edit and publish. I also I accept all of the invitations. I find our reviewers, I RSVP. It's all a very manual, very laborious process to get a reviewer from the invite stage into the theatre. When they can't come last minute, I've got to find their replacement, etc. I also run all of the company side of things, so the same thing that any small business would have. Thank gosh I have an accountant, because that's beyond my area of expertise. But everything else I do. And then I spend a lot of time preparing our productions. And that's where my artistic director side probably comes in a bit more, curating our season, curating our festival. I do that as well. And in the theatre industry, you always have to be a year or two ahead of where you actually are. So although I have projects that go on stage, I mean, my next show opens on Thursday. So I have 4 shows that go on in February, 2 in March, 3 in May, 1 in June, 1 in October. So we've got a lot going on. And despite all of those shows happening at the moment, my brain's on 2023, planning what we need to be doing, what grants we need to apply for, what council approval I need to get, what venues I need to hire, all of that sort of stuff. So it's definitely not a standard managing director role, because usually you'd have another person to help with this stuff. But we'll grow. And as we continue to grow, we take more people on, and that's great.
What is the process of getting a show to just allow a reviewer from the site to come and see the show and review it? How do you contact them, and what do you say?
I'm lucky now that we're a few years in, so I don't have to do it anymore. At the beginning,
they come to you.
Yes. At the beginning, it was a lot of cold emailing. Mm-hmm. Hi, this is the idea I have. I have these reviewers.
Let us critique you.
They're going to come.
Let us judge you mercilessly.
Yeah, no, it's such an accepting industry, honestly. People are really keen to have their shows reviewed, but they do want to see that you have some credibility behind you. It's not like every blog site's going to be given, tickets to major opening nights. So you've got to prove your worth, and you've got to earn your stripes. And that was a big thing in this industry. You've got to earn your stripes. I was very lucky. While I was at uni, I went to our university publication and said, hey, listen, you review everything else. Where's the theatre reviews? And they were like, who would want to do that? And I said, if you publish whatever I write, I will make all of the contacts and I'll set it up. And they were cool with that. And so I had the opportunity to first start writing with a publisher, with someone else to oversee it and to edit it, etc. And I did that through uni, and then quickly moved on to more sites, and then went, I think I could just do this myself. And so I did. Now I'm that person. And that's great because, as I said, we have over 50 writers around the country, and from such a diverse range of, we are just such a diverse range of people. I said a lot of us work in the industry, but that is, for most of us, a part-time job. People work in all fields. We're of all ages, all backgrounds, all diversities. We have a number of people who have experience living with disability. We have people who are culturally and linguistically diverse. We have people who have moved to Australia and wanted to, better understand the theatre scene. We have newcomers who are moving into their passion for the arts, and, those who are later in life looking back going, it's time for me to re-explore my love of the arts. And so, that's been a real privilege too. So we definitely have had the opportunity to earn our stripes. Now I don't really have to contact anymore because we have managed to get our name out there enough, which is great because after 1,200 reviews, you would hope so. Nearly 1,300 reviews. And so now we've formed great relationships with a lot of publicists around the country, with a lot of the major theatre companies, a lot of the independent theatre companies. And we do a lot of festivals. And festivals are a great way for more independent companies to get to meet the reviewers, because they're actually given our email addresses on a silver platter, and we go a lot. And it's, for me, with every festival that we review, it's always a priority to get my reviewers to cover as much of the festival as we possibly can. If it's theatrical in the festival, our goal, our hope, our wish is that we will be there. Now, that's really hard when you do a festival like the Perth Fringe Festival, the Adelaide Fringe Festival, Sydney Festival, because there are a huge number of acts per day, let alone throughout the festival. So we do everything that we possibly can. But that's been a huge way that we've met a lot of our independent companies, especially, has been through doing these festivals. And we've now been doing them for 3 years. We're always on the media list, and so we're there. And but luckily now there's a little less groveling. It was a lot of groveling at the beginning.
A little less. Still some groveling, but not that much.
Well, that's true, because sometimes I get an email from one of my reviewers that says, I really want to cover this show. I think I've got something important to say about it. And I go, okay. And I go back to my old grovel email. Hi, this is Carly from Theatre Travels. Here are our statistics. You might want to know about our readership. No problem. And can I send a reviewer? And everyone's going to say yes, because they always want reviewers. So it's pretty good. And unfortunately, after COVID, a lot of review sites didn't stay in the game. So we are working really hard right now. I think Friday night, I had 9 reviewers out in different cities to different shows. So it's a busy night.
If somebody wanted to come and write for your site, what would you look for in them to accept them as a review writer?
Absolutely. So we always have a form on our website so that people can join whenever they find that they want to try this. We ask for a small sample of your writing, and that doesn't have to be something that's been published. I'm looking for people who want their first try at this as well. I'm happy to nurture that. But we just ask, for a sample of writing so that we know that we've got a base to work with. That sample of writing could be your latest opinions of the last movie you saw, song you listened to. Ideally, it's a play or musical you went to see, but hey, we won't be picky. And as far as the kinds of people, everyone. everyone who has an interest in theatre and who wants to get out and see more and critically understand theatre a bit more and share that opinion with others, please come and apply on the Theatre Travels website. There is a form there waiting for you.
And when you're publishing a review, are you ever thinking about the target audience of the review specifically? Like
To an extent.
what is the review like? Who is the review for, other than the people who put on the show who want to know someone's opinion?
Yeah, definitely to an extent. And I think that goes back to what I was saying before about really making sure that the language is always, like we're talking to our friends. I want to make sure that if you're going, oh, do I want to see Come From Away at the Capitol Theatre, I can give you an answer. And by the way, if Come From Away comes to a city near you, the answer is always yes, it's the best show ever. but yeah, I'd say that more than anything, I think that the show is really going to determine its own readership, its own demographic. So I don't necessarily put too much pressure on speaking to the target audience of the show, because that's a big ask because of how many we do. So I think that, the right target audience is going to read the review that's relevant to them. But as a uniform rule across the Theatre Travels reviews, they'll always be as though we're telling our friends what we thought that night. And they'll be quick reads. We like to try and keep them around 500 words. Sometimes they're more because the writer had a lot to say, but they're generally in the 500 to 700 word region. So it won't take you more than a few minutes to read it. And it'll be on your phone. It'll be on social media. It'll be on our website. You don't have to go and get a paper. Just log on and have a read and see whether we liked it enough to convince you to go. And that's it. As I said, our goal has always been to get more people to see more theatre. I think that's how we grow our industry. The only way that the arts industry can grow, aside from government funding, which would be nice, but the only way the arts industry can grow is if people keep coming, and if more people keep coming. And if we can convert you from going to a restaurant or a movie or a night at home just for one night a year to come and see a show, then we're doing our jobs.
Have you ever had to ditch a reviewer because their reviews were too discouraging and too mean?
Not because they were too mean.
Okay.
Too mean we work with. There have been a couple times where I've had to edit it a bit more than I would have liked to, on the back of the production team contacting saying, what? It's too harsh. And so we don't want that, because as much as we want to encourage audiences, I'm also, particularly for the independent sector, really aware that we want to encourage emerging artists to stay in the industry. We want to keep building our industry. We've got to have the people here. And I think that my reviewers are really on board with that mission as well. So it's definitely, I think in nearly 1,300 reviews, it's maybe happened twice that we've had to really edit or take a review down. So it's very, very rare. Everyone's on board with that same goal of let's get people to the theatre. And I think now more than ever, all of us who work in the industry are thinking the same thing. Let's get people back to the theatre, confident in their experience at the theatre. That was something, particularly after the first wave of COVID, we were all really writing a lot about what it was like to go to the theatre, because we want people to come. We want people to experience this with us, whether we're in the audience or we're on stage or we made the show, whatever our role is, we want you there.
Could you tell us more about the impact that COVID and restrictions and everything else, how has that affected theatre from your perspective?
I mean, in the obvious immediate sense, it was all of the cancellations. So when things first started to shut down, I mean, my personal experience was that in March 2020, 2 weeks out from a show, I had to cancel, well, 2 weeks out from a festival, I had to cancel 8 shows. That's a big financial hit, to be honest, because by 2 weeks out, you've made all of your investments. So you've bought your set, you've bought your costumes, you've bought your props, you've paid for the theatre, all of that's already paid. And most theatres, at least in Sydney, most were really encouraging and trying to get people back in, and they did make those offers, to credit you in giving you the theatre again. So everyone really worked together, and it was very generous of everyone to do so. But when you make the investment in 2020 and you're expecting ticket sales a couple of weeks later to recoup that investment, and it takes 18 months to recoup your investment, it's a bit of a hard financial hit. So there was that obvious immediate impact of cancellations and how hard we were all hit because of that. Unfortunately, as was well documented in the media, there was also then the whole like government COVID payment scheme saga and the arts, and the fact that by virtue of the way this industry works and how many of us are contractors, freelancers, on short-term contracts, etc., no one was eligible. Very few people. I read a statistic the other day, it was 1 in 5 were eligible for JobKeeper. Which then kind of essentially your only other option was to render yourself unemployed, which is really an unfair title when you work 40 hours a week in an industry that people just aren't recognizing. So that was a huge and overly documented saga, so I won't continue on that. But that was definitely, that caused a lot of angst in the industry that I don't think has yet lifted. And then I think that the most current impact of COVID on the industry, or on my industry, is the hesitancy in returning to the theatre, particularly right now because of Omicron. It's much harder than I've experienced since 2018 to sell a ticket right now. First, we faced how could you possibly advertise a show right now? It would sound tone deaf if you're saying to people, hey, can you come indoors in an enclosed environment near lots of strangers to see a work? By the way, there are 92,000 cases today. Like that, no one was making that announcement then. So where we would normally have had, 2 or 3 months of publicity, we've had to pack it into 2 or 3 weeks. And that's really hard because, as I said before, we don't have the budget to necessarily, we're not booking out an ad on TV or taking a poster on a bus that's not in an independent artworks budget. So that leaves it to word of mouth and to social media and to, the reliance on publications, on radio interviews, but all of that is really time consuming and you only get 2 or 3 weeks to do it. And you're battling how many people are not yet confident enough to go inside into an enclosed venue with strangers. So it's definitely been a much harder time. This February, my 4 shows are much harder to sell than I have faced in the other 17 we've done for the company.
In my recent experience of going to theatre, we have to wear masks, and then when we go inside, about half of the crowd then take their masks off.
Oh, so here you get like
in
a little,
dark.
like, the ushers with their little flashlights. Here you get flashed if you take your mask off in Sydney.
Okay.
I was just in New York though, and everything was 10 times stricter. There they've shut down. There are no candy bars, no buying wine, no having. You're not even allowed to take so much as water into the theatre at the moment.
Overpriced anyway.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually a budget saver. It's quite good. but as well, they don't want anyone having any reason to take their mask off. And then they have the ushers walking up and down the aisle like every 20 minutes of the production. And if it's like just below your nose instead of on your nose, you get the little, hey, pick it up, even during the show. So they're being so diligent there that I came home and I was like, we could probably put a pause on the wine. But who doesn't love a glass of wine at the theatre? Or my personal favorite, a choc top.
Every theatre should have choc tops at the theatre. Maybe I'm just not going to the right theatres. It's
only the big ones. The big ones sell choc tops, and that's where you want to be.
Nice.
Best theatre snack ever.
Do you think that there's something uniquely special about going to live theatre when compared to a recording of a live performance? Do you think that's a good enough substitute? Sometimes.
I think it was a good enough substitute during the core or the heart of the pandemic when we couldn't do anything else. I think now that we can have live theatre again, I don't really think that it's a substitute. I think that if people would like to do it as an alternative art form, that's cool, and they should. But I think it's a completely different medium. there is nothing like live theatre. You can't replicate that on screen, because the whole point of it being live is that you experience it around other people. And if we think about what theatre is supposed to do, it's supposed to challenge, it's supposed to raise conversation, it's supposed to excite, it's supposed to inspire, whatever it's supposed to do. It's so enhanced by experiencing that with someone you don't know right next to you. And I don't think that there's any supplement for that live experience. I also love that the shows are never the same, and they can't be the same because the audience isn't the same. That's exciting. There's something so raw and so vulnerable about live theatre that the recorded mediums can't replicate, because they don't have those same vulnerabilities. If you think about film, you can reshoot a scene 20 times if you need to. We can't do it again, not in front of an audience. So there's an immediacy to it that I don't think can be replicated. But I do think that there is a lot of value in recorded theatre and live streamed theatre. I just think it's a different medium. And I think that one of the best ways of thinking about that is that film and TV is so often called a director's medium. It's the director's platform, because they frame, quite literally with their cameras, they frame what they want you to see at that exact time. So there is nothing happening in the background if you're not supposed to be watching the background in film or TV. And we don't have that same view or that same opportunity in theatre. We always have things happening. And you have to watch the stage as a whole. And that might mean you catch us in a vulnerable moment, maybe something's not working, or it might mean that you see the most beautiful use of like set choreography that you can imagine, or you see something in the ensemble that you've never noticed before. And I love that. I love that there's just a chance to see the picture as a whole that you just don't get. So I don't think that live streamed theatre is the same, because you have to watch it through the director's lens again. You're on screen, you have to. The screen's this big and the theatre's this big, like it's not comparable. So it's great to have it. It's a cool option. I loved watching it when I couldn't watch anything live. For me, it's not as engaging, but that's a personal thing. Everyone will have a different experience. And I think that if there's an opportunity to watch a show that you couldn't otherwise access, for example, I watched a lot that was coming out of Germany during the pandemic. I watched a lot from the National Theatre in London, places that I was not readily available to be at. Absolutely, super cool. Wouldn't have had the opportunity to see it otherwise. If it's a show that's coming to a city near you and you can see it live, go to the theatre. It's going to be a different experience.
And with live theatre, there's always the risk that they might make a mistake,
which is so exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So just as you've said
danger.
that. Well, so while I was in New York just now, I went to see a preview night of MJ the Musical, which is a new like bio jukebox-esque musical about Michael Jackson. He uses all of his songs, etc. And the night I went, got through the first act and it was fine. It was a preview. It was fine. And interval was feeling like really long. And then I was like, how long can an interval be? And at like minute 38 or 39 of this interval, they were like, an announcement came over the intercom, which was the lead role of Michael Jackson will now be played by, and they said a name. And I wish I remembered it because he was exceptional. It was a swing. The swing had to be called on. I don't know why the lead had to call out, but he did. And so in comes a brand new lead character for Act 2. So good, but weird to see two different people play the same role in a night. But the second guy was so good. And if anything, all that does is tell you how bloody talented swings are, which are, for those who don't know, swings are cast members who learn multiple roles and understudy a range of characters, which means not just understanding the character, but knowing every single step they take, every move they make, their choreography, all of their songs, all their lines, etc. And they usually do it for multiple characters, which is where the term swing comes in. It's the hardest job without question because of how many roles they're learning and how many tracks, which is where you go on the stage, how many tracks they have to memorize as well. So anyway, so we saw the swing come in. We get almost through Act 2 and I see something drop on stage and I was like, oh, what's that? What did they drop? One of the microphones, it must have been. because 2 minutes later, the entire sound system is out.
Ooh.
The actors are on stage with not so much as a microphone. There's nothing working. And all of a sudden, all you can hear is the stage manager screaming from the wings, off stage, off stage, off stage. And then the stage manager comes out for what I can only imagine is her Broadway debut and says to the whole audience, not as a stage manager, but Broadway debut on the actual stage of a Broadway theatre in front of an audience, says, so sorry, everyone, give us a few minutes. We've got to work out what happened with the sound. We hope we'll be able to finish the show. And everyone around me is like, oh, because by now it's gone forever because of the long interval. And I am loving it. I was like, not that I wish this upon any production, but this was worth every dollar of the price of this ticket because I'm watching real theatre. I'm watching theatre makers create. I'm watching them solve problems and get a show back up. And I was in heaven. Like, this was so good for me. Also, I walked out going, thank gosh, I can move through the rest of my career knowing mistakes happen even on Broadway. But it was just so exciting to watch them fix it and then to watch how professional they were and how talented they were. They picked it right up and carried on like nothing had ever happened. And I just thought, anyone who didn't understand what a gift they just saw, like, what a shame for them, because we just saw actual theatre making happening. And it was so cool.
So unique. No one else who saw the other shows got to see it mess up like that.
No, exactly right. And you know what? If you'd live streamed it, you would have edited it out. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad they didn't, because it was so exciting. Not for them, I'm sure it was super stressful, but for me, it was so exciting.
Your festival, the No Intermission Festival, how did that come into play? And how is this different to something like the Australian Fringe Festival? What makes it better?
I don't think it makes it better. I just think it offers a different opportunity at a different time of the year for a different group of people. I don't think it's necessarily better, except that, of course, it's the Theatre Travels one, which just by virtue makes it excellent. Mm-hmm. I wish.
That was my point, yes.
I hope one day we get to a stage where I don't say that sarcastically, but I think that right now I'm just thrilled to have this festival. I think it's such an opportunity for so many more artists to have a paid gig, A, and B, for us to get to meet them and to welcome them into our Theatre Travel circle. We're really big on re-engaging artists as much as we can, especially in roles of leadership and crew and creative roles. As an example, I'm working with one stage manager on 3 different shows this year. I'm obsessed with this woman. She's life. I have the same lighting designer doing 2 shows. I've got a sound designer doing 2 shows, and they're all different shows. And so it's a great way for us to meet new people to enter the Theatre Travels family. And the same goes for actors, to be honest. We have a lot of people who do multiple productions with us as well. Why I started this festival was twofold. First being, I was at the Adelaide Fringe Festival reviewing, and I saw a great piece of theatre, but it was only about maybe 35, 40 minutes long. And I was like, where could I, if I wanted to direct something like this or do something like this, where would I ever put that on? You can't rent a theatre and charge at full ticket price for 35 to 40 minutes. What would I ever do with something like this? But the piece was so good that I really wanted to bring it to Sydney. And that's something I like bringing Sydney, New South Wales, or Australian debuts here, or world premieres. We've had a few of as well. So I'm really big on us being the first to tackle something in Sydney. The Laramie Project was the first on the last show that we did we did one other that had been on before, but 20 years ago. And so that was a big thing. I was like, where do I put this on? Nowhere. Okay, I better create that. And the second thing was just about having more opportunities for the emerging artist sector. I think that what I just said probably hits the nail on the head for me, where I don't see something that I want in the industry. My response has just been, okay, then make it. Maybe that's crazy, but that's how I've been going about my career so far, and I wouldn't have changed it for the world. So where there's something that you want to do, just do it, make it happen. So that's why we started the festival. And to finish the story, yes, I did put that work that I saw in Adelaide in the first No Intermission Festival because I really wanted to. It was really good. And other than that, we did the first festival, and gosh, it was real trial and error, the first festival, but it worked and it was great. We had 8 shows in the first one. And I thought I'd make it an annual festival with 8 shows, but COVID sort of stopped me in my tracks on that. And it became 4 shows and a biannual festival, and the quality really increased, and that's where it will stay now. But it was just about the opportunity to even meet playwrights. I just felt like that wasn't something I was having any other scope for without this festival. I speak directly to the playwright. They submit. So what we do for No Intermission is we open online submissions. The playwright can submit their own script. We read them all. We select what we want. And then we go and we ask them what they'll charge for it. And we pay the writers, of course. And we do an independent production of it, a fully fledged production. And that was really cool too, because we started to get involved in works that were only partly ready, but the concept was just so great that we were like, great, we'll join in on the development phase. That was really exciting. And I went, I want to do this more. Sometimes we get completely done scripts that are just amazing and we take them. But our 2020 festival, which became the 2021 festival, we had over 450 submissions come from 14 different countries. And all of that was done from us posting on social media, posting in writers groups around the world, etc. We've never advertised officially. We've only ever done it on socials. And we had over 450 scripts and had to close our submissions early because there are 2 of us to read them all. And we went, we can't read anymore. This is enough to pick 8 from, and then to boil it down to 4. So there's a hunger for it. And we realized that really quickly with the first festival, that this was something that people wanted. We could see that from the writing response from playwrights. We could see it from the casting response, from how many actors wanted to participate, how many crew members wanted to be involved. And I thought, well, others are seeing this gap in the market as well. They want to do it. We should keep doing it. And last year we sold out 100% of our productions 2 weeks before we opened, and they got really great reviews. So it's working. And so we'll keep doing it. It'll be back 2023.
Is that the main benefit of having a production company with a name, that you have the prestige to attract a lot of people's attention? How would the benefits change if you were just a person who rented a hall and said, "Hey, if you want to do a show, do it here"? What's the benefit of having a name, a brand?
One of them is what you just said. I mean, as I mentioned, we've now done 17 productions over the last 3 years, or whatever it's been. Yeah, 2018 till now, 4 years now. We've done 17 shows in 4 years. So we've had the opportunity to make a bit of noise. And that was another reason we started reviewing in the first place. It was to get our foot in the door in markets we knew we'd want to go to, and we knew we would want to have audience there. And so we started reviewing in different places, and that it's all been very strategic in one day getting our shows there too. And knowing we have someone to talk to when we get there. It also worked because we started to form really great relationships with the theatres themselves, because we were there reviewing. And so we have then had the opportunity, when I've reached out to say I need a theatre, we've always hired a theatre, and it hasn't been a problem in any city we've been to. We've always gotten a great space. And I do think that space is really important. I think that making sure you've got a few checkpoints for me. One, if the theatre has a name and a following base of its own, that's always really useful. 2 is that it's the right size and the right vibe for the show you're doing. Just because you might want to sell 300 tickets doesn't mean that a small intimate show should go into a 300-seat theatre. It should probably go to a 50-seat theatre. And I like to do a lot of those. I much prefer an intimate performance. So picking the right size and the right vibe. I really find it very important to make sure that all of my venues are accessible. We always go places that are inclusive for everyone to attend a show. And I think that it would be great to see more and more small spaces opening around the country, particularly in Sydney, where we don't have that many small theatres. But as new ones do form, I'd love to see them accessible for everyone. Let's get rid of the really steep staircase to get in the front door. That's a really big barrier to entry. And its location. making sure it's in a part of the city that people expect to see theatre. And that's been a really massive point for me. It's twice as hard if you want to make people go somewhere they've never been. So yeah, we've had the opportunity to work in great spaces, and that's been really good for building our brand. We're still a really small company with a relatively small name. Our bigger name is definitely in the reviewing sector, but we ride on it. And the biggest differences between producing as an individual and as a company are credibility. That's probably the number one difference. It just is it immediately tells you that it's a more professional experience. I think with that, you attract a higher caliber of actors, and therefore often you have a higher production quality, which leaves audiences happy, which is a total cycle. So our first show, as I mentioned, was big. I knew that we were a brand new company and we'd have to find a cast willing to take a risk on a brand new company. So I booked a theatre that was out of reach, really, for most independent artists. It was way too expensive, but that's okay. It was the right move for us, and we paid an honorarium fee to everyone who participated, and that was also big in the independent sector, which is largely profit share based, and we certainly use that model a lot, and we're grateful that artists want to participate with that model. We operate on the model ourselves. We're never paid for anything that, my writers for my review site, they're all volunteers. I'm a volunteer, never been paid a cent. So, we make sure that whatever we're asking everyone else to do, we're doing the same. And I do think that as you start to build more of a name for yourself, it becomes a lot easier to attract the right auditionees, is probably step one, long before you get to the right audience. You get the right people in the door. For example, I cast a show, we had our callbacks last week. The show will be on in June, and it's 10 characters, and we had 257 video auditions come in for 10 characters. That's a much bigger number than a lot of independent video auditions would normally collect. The talent pool was just mind-blowing. It took us a week to cast. Normally we cast the day of callbacks. It took us a week to confirm, because we could have cast the show 4 times over. They were so good. So that's definitely been on the back of choosing scripts that people want to do and picking works that are exciting enough that gauge interest, and B, building our name. People want to work with us, and that's really flattering and really exciting. And I'm very, very grateful that that's the name we're sort of building for ourselves. We want to be the kind, fun place that respects that most people are in the independent sector as well as the rest of their life. This is often not someone's full-time job, and I'm very conscious of that, because it's not mine either. And well, it is mine really, but I also have another full-time job. I just do this like 40 hours a week. It's fine. But yeah, I just think it's really, it does, where you can be part of something with a company, you should. And if you can set up your own company, that's awesome, and all power to you. And I hope to see more and more companies spring to life at the end of COVID, because we lost too many and we need more artists back. But it's very hard to produce something with just your name and to look as credible as someone who has a company. And then the very boring logistical side of it is accounting and insurance. Much better with a company.
Interesting point that you just made. It's not the next day. How could it be? We're wearing the same clothes. Anyway, moving right along to the next, next thing to say. All right, here we go. I have to just look at my notes right here. So in 2022, so now you're directing an Australian play about the female experience of being silenced, and your bio on the Theatre Travels website says that you prioritize telling the stories of real empowered women in Theatre Travels productions. And in 2020, you directed a show called Girl, Shut Your Mouth, and that has the word girl in it. So why prioritize stories about women, and what is a woman's story?
Yeah, all great questions. And I actually had not, until you mentioned it, put the two together, Girl, Shut Your Mouth and Silenced. And today I went into rehearsal and I was like, oh my gosh, mind blown. But yes, I am. I'm very lucky to be.
Girl. It has the word girl in there. I
I'm
made a
very lucky
connection.
to be directing a new Australian work written by just a wonderful, wonderful performer. I've had the opportunity to work with a few times, and now she's making her playwriting debut, and we're actually in development on that script at the moment. And it's been awesome. So I'm very lucky to be doing that, and I can't wait to see where it goes. To answer your questions, they're biggies. Big questions. What makes a woman's story? Actually, first, I'll answer the other part first. Why prioritize telling female stories? When I started the company in 2018, to be honest, very few of the Sydney theatre companies, particularly the mid to larger companies, very few were run by women. And when I say very few, I mean one. So the fact that we were a female-led organization definitely contributed to the decision to produce what we personally care most about, and it's telling empowered stories. I think it's been well documented that so often the characters written for women are lame, for lack of a better term. They're not whole characters, and if you compare them usually to the males in the story, they're nowhere near as meaty. They don't really tell of the female experience or of just a human experience. Often the women are nothing more than the girlfriend or the wife or the mother or the teacher. They're not often the star. And when they are, it's a great find when you find a story that does not in any way fail the Bechdel test, which is a woman consistently talking about a man. Mm-hmm. And if they are consistently talking about a man, it's not a great female story.
Doesn't it also require a woman to be talking to another woman? So a one-woman show would fail that test, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, no, not necessarily.
Okay.
Okay. In monologue, yeah, you can definitely spend an hour just talking about a man for sure. But we've really gone hunting for well-developed, well-rounded female stories. And when we say the stories of real women, what we really mean by that is that they are fleshed out. They are more than just a mother. They might also be a mother, but they are their own independent person as well. And that they might be incredibly flawed. We're not saying that, they have to be the hero or the angel of the story, not in any way. That's not the female experience. It's not a reflection of society. We want stories that are just as meaty and gritty and interesting about women as they are about men. And that's what we have really gone looking for. And we've been lucky to find some fantastic works using that sort of framework. It's not the only kind of story we do, but it's definitely something that we love to do whenever we can, and where I, as a director, feel like I have the most to say, and I use my play as a vehicle to say that. That's what makes it a female story, and why. I've been very lucky to find some great scripts. I actually have a show opening. Well, we were in Sydney in 2021. And we're now going to Canberra this month and to Adelaide next month with the show. And it's about the female experience of war, and particularly of women who served in the Vietnam War. And I love doing stories like that. I love bringing a perspective of a story that you don't otherwise see everywhere.
All right. Well, speaking of stories, this brings us to the last question that I always ask when I do this, and that is, of course, why are stories important?
I see why this is the end.
Sorry to hit you with
the last question.
It's
a big one. Why are stories so important?
Mess it up. Have a good answer.
I feel the pressure. Look, I feel like as a theatre maker, my job is not just to entertain. In fact, someone said that to me today. They said, oh yeah, all we have to do is put on a good show for them for an hour. No, it's not. My job is to in some capacity, use my show to achieve a call for action. There has to be something that when you stand up from the theatre, and I'm not talking about all, sometimes you just want to go to a comedy, fine. But in general, the shows I like to do, when you stand up and you walk out of the theatre, I want you to feel that there's something you have to do, or there's something you have to say. There's a reason you need to keep the conversation going. Whether that is a call to change a behavior that you have, or a call to look out a bit more for a fellow citizen, or whether the call is just to look at the bright side of life, whatever it might be, I want you to have to think about, I want you to challenge yourself. Am I achieving what I'm supposed to achieve on the back of knowing that story? And I mention all of this to answer your question in my own roundabout way. Why is story so important? I think it's because the arts is a comfortable way to have really big conversations. The arts in all capacities, whether we do that through music or theatre, as I do, film, whatever it might be. I think that the arts has the opportunity to challenge, to excite, to inspire, to criticize, and to force conversation. And I think that's why stories are so important. It's a comfortable way to encourage people to think more critically and more deeply about their own actions, their own behaviors, their own lives, their own thoughts, their own opinions, their own attitudes, whatever it might be. So I think that there's so much to learn from a good story.
Is it more
should both reflect life?
Is it more comfortable because it's usually within a fictional setting as opposed to someone just being at a podium telling the audience to do stuff?
I think so, yeah. I think that there's this sense of familiarity that comes when you get to know a character, as opposed to being dictated to as to how you must change your behavior, or how, that's more like a law. That's for a judge or a magistrate to dictate. That's not how we do it. We use characters, you're right, and often a fictional context. And we ask you to think about yourself in the reflection of the characters that we show you. And so I do think it's more comfortable because of that. I also think that, and this brings us back to our conversation from earlier, what's the difference between live and recorded theatre?
Earlier today.
That's where pre-blackout. Mm-hmm. I think also that is that's another answer to that. Yeah, it's more comfortable in the theatre because you're surrounded by other people, right? It's not a targeted message just at you. You're supposed to hear it and you're supposed to take it on board, but you hear it and you experience your reaction to it in the comfort of the darkness mm-hmm. and in the safety in numbers. And I think that all of that makes storytelling so important.
Fantastic. And that brings us to a close. We did it. We made it in one go, single-handedly. So, Miss Carly Fisher, thank you so much for coming on to One Story Building.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun.